If I invited you to tell me the country, the nation in our world that is most opposite to the United States of America, chances are your answer would be, well, obviously it's communist China. But what if we look at a disturbing similarity of things that happen in China that may provide a roadmap for us to watch about things that may happen here, particularly in one area, religious liberty. Let's talk about that. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has issued a judgment recently about the state of religious liberty in the nation of China. Beijing, it turns out, uses a couple of government mechanisms to control religion, including oversight bodies such as the State Administration for Religious Affairs and the Communist Party's United Front Work Department. The purpose of those organizations is to ensure that the religious content of what happens in the churches of China is approved by the government, and that worship turns out to be always patriotic, always promoting national unity, and always approves and stands in line with the messages that come from the president of the Communist Party. Well, why is that related to us in any way? Well, a few weeks ago, in the midst of a long laundry list of almost random topics that President Biden included in his second State of the Union address, he failed to mention one topic that has had consistent and bipartisan recognition for decades. He didn't mention religious liberty. You say, well, okay, so that didn't make the cut. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is religious liberty is not merely a right enshrined in the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment. It's also a significant piece in national security for this country. You see, going all the way back to the time of President Truman, President Truman convened a committee on religion and the military, and in the report that came out of that committee following World War II, they decided that it was important to protect and sustain religious liberty, particularly within the military, but really nationwide, and this was the justification. They said, indeed, it has been necessary for the totalitarians of the world to attack and stifle religion because such faith represents the antithesis of everything they teach. In other words, the very right of religious liberty is part of what makes America so distinctive from the totalitarian nations around the world. Well, following President Truman, we see an emphasis included in the speeches of John Kennedy, who was the nation's first Catholic president, and yet outspoken that religious liberty was a fundamental characteristic that made the United States unique among the community of nations. Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, all the way through. Finally, we come to the 80s with Ronald Reagan and then with the first George Bush, and we find them including in speeches this idea that religious liberty is not merely a right for private practice, but it's a distinctive element of the United States which makes us strong and strengthens our reputation with those who seek to serve their faith freely around the world. This is not just a Republican issue, it's been bipartisan. In 1997, the National Security Strategy put into place and approved by President Bill Clinton made a specific and explicit reference to religious liberty in the context of national security. He said, we will work with international institutions to combat religious persecution. There have been 2 Democrat administrations and 2 Republican administrations since that time, and each time religious liberty has been included as a part of our national security strategy from both sides of the political aisle. Until we come to the current administration, where we find that under President Biden's watch, a strong reaffirmation of religious liberty has gone missing. All right, well, how does China play into all this? Well, it's interesting. If we look at the way the Chinese government has treated religion and the way it has tried to control religion, certainly not giving liberty of conscience or the freedom of faith expression, that is not a right granted by the government in China. Now, we would say the citizenry there is right to practice civil disobedience in this area, because while the right of religious liberty is enshrined for us in the Bill of Rights as an attachment to the U.S. Constitution, the fact of the matter is those rights are recognized as rights granted to all human beings by their Creator. The Constitution simply clarifies what those rights are so that no government at any point in America's future would be tempted to withdraw rights that didn't come from the government but come directly from the hand of God. In China, what they've done, one specific way that the Chinese communists attempt to shape religion is by controlling leadership selection. For example, the Chinese government has outlawed the Dalai Lama as a leader of Tibetan Buddhism. They have determined that he is not amenable to the messages that the government approves of, so they have kept him in exile and tried to limit his ability to influence his followers on Chinese soil. It's not just within Buddhism. The Chinese government has also had a demand, particularly with the Roman Catholic Church. They have now issued a demand to have pre-approval and selection control for all Chinese Catholic leaders. In other words, in order to be a Catholic priest in China, you have to be vetted by the government and you have to publicly vow that you support socialist dogma and that you are a proud supporter and participant in the agenda of the Communist Party. At least up until this point, the Vatican has seemed willing to allow China's Communist Party to have the choice of leaders in Catholic churches. I think that's a dangerous position for them to hold. Besides the selection of leadership, another mechanism of control is through what is called sinicizing religion. This refers to making religions that originated somewhere else, especially Western religions. We know for a fact that Christianity is not a Western religion. It didn't originate in Western civilization, but it has come to be the dominant religion in Western civilization. And so China views it as an outside religion. They have decided that Christianity must be made more Chinese. Now, what they've done to that end is they have a 5-year work plan to make Christianity, particularly Christianity, what they call more authentically Chinese. That is, the interpretation of religious doctrine, the publication of sermons, the rituals practiced, and even the architectural styles of places of worship must conform to the Chinese Communist Party's ideological and policy requirements. Okay? They're going to make sure that the message that a believer hears from the pulpit in his church is a message that has been pre-approved by the government. Well, the third step in this process is they have announced a plan to rewrite the Bible. The Bible is being rewritten so that it more explicitly communicates the values of the Chinese Communist Party. Literally, the words of Jesus will now be reshaped to show that he is a proud follower of the Communist Party in China. Along with rewriting Scripture, they have declared that all houses of worship must be duly registered with the government, all religious leadership must be licensed by the government, and they have commanded that pictures of Chairman Mao and the current President Xi must be prominently displayed in all houses of worship. Why is this a big deal? Why do we care about what's happening in China? Well, first of all, because true and authentic Christians in China are our brothers and sisters. And they are in a very dangerous place, a place not unsimilar to what the first generations of Christians faced under the wrath of the Roman Empire. The persecution in China is already at historic levels, and it will continue to increase as the demonic energy behind that governmental system is focused more intently on Christianity. What's the problem here? Well, the problem with every despotic or tyrannical government is the fact that religious people and organizations like churches have an allegiance to something higher than the Communist Party. And the Communist Party cannot allow that view of loyalty. There can't be anything superior to the government. Well, how does that relate to us? Because unfortunately, I believe that the current trends of progressivism in our generation in the United States is moving us in a direction where the church will be treated here in a manner similar to what's happening in China. We haven't yet seen the government announce a desire for participation in leadership selection within churches and denominations, but we have seen a very selective choice of only acceptable leaders who are allowed to speak in the White House or in public venues. In other words, the message is clear. You toe the line and hold to the administration's viewpoint, or you don't have a platform. Not leadership selection yet, but a carrot and stick approach, which says there's no carrot if you don't say what we want you to say. The second mechanism of sinicizing or making the faith more Chinese, that translates here in the approach of the secular worldview that is all around us, which demands that Christianity be altered to accommodate the current trends and fads of our generation. In other words, the attacks of Christian groups on university campuses with the statement that you can't exist unless you open your leadership to students of all faiths and of no faiths. In other words, you can only have a, quote, Christian group on a university campus if radicals that have no faith at all are allowed to be in leadership roles. Well, see, what is that other than the demand that we have no legitimate place in the public square unless, as Christians, we come over to the secular worldview and accommodate all of our beliefs to all of their beliefs? Well, thirdly, in the same way that the Communist Party is trying to deify political leadership, even to the point of rewriting Scripture, demanding no other allegiance above that of the Communist Party, what we are beginning to see already in this country is an unmistakable sense that the church is portrayed as haters and bigots, that we are outsiders who are against the inevitable development, the flow of human history. In other words, we're being told that drag queen story hour is just the way the world is going today, and we better catch up or risk being left behind, or worse, being eliminated altogether. So, Pastor, you're overreacting. You're making a big fuss about nothing. Okay. You can either call the fire department when the fire breaks out in the basement, or you can wait to call the fire department when all 12 stories of the high-rise building are in flame. I'm just saying that what we see in China is a consistent pattern. It's not tied to the Communist Party. It's tied to a worldview that broaches no rivals. And the pattern, the steps that we see happening in China, America, we need to watch for evidence of those same steps happening. And it begins first with our governmental leadership dropping the assurances of religious liberty from the public conversation, simply ignoring it. And when it has been deprioritized in that way, then we are then able to see changes begin to be presented and implemented. I did a Truth Currents a while back on a political topic, and somebody wrote a comment on our YouTube channel. And the comment simply said, Romans 13 tells us to obey the government. Yes and no. Romans 13 tells us what our attitude toward government should be. But it's not as simple as that. There's no nuance in that sort of ridiculous comment. You see, the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, is filled with examples of refusal to submit to the authority of government when the demands of government contradict our higher loyalty to the God we serve. I'm not telling you it's time for revolution. Do not hear me say that. But I am telling you, if you're an authentic follower of Jesus Christ, it is time to pay attention for what's being said, what's not being said, what's being proposed. You say, well, is there any evidence this is already happening? Yeah. The Restoration of Marriage Act was passed in December of 2022, just a couple of months ago. This act, passed in both houses of Congress, is the first step toward making gender rights trump religious liberty. Wait and see. It's time to pay attention, because this religious liberty that we've always assumed was our inherent and God-given right, it is our inherent and God-given right. But the government is slowly, subtly, already beginning a process of moving to a place where those uncooperative Christians will be brought into line. I tell you what, we will not be brought into line. And our brothers and sisters in China should inspire us. This is Truth Currents.